Utilities Commission of Nevada regarding the investigation of NV Energy's Advanced Service Delivery Meter Program, also known as their Smart Meter Program, and its implementation. The Commission has designated this matter as docket number 11-10007. Appearing for the Commission today is Nancy Wenzel. I'm the Utilities Hearings Officer with the Commission. And also to my left, Deanna Janasi, who's an administrative attorney with the Commission, and to my right, Commission Policy Advisors John Davis and David Sherez. I would like to take appearances from our public entities here at the table. I will start with staff, who's to my right.
Good morning, Hearing Officer Wenzel. I'm Tammy Cordova, and with me is Adam Denise. And in our Carson City office, we have, well, I'll let him say it for himself.
Okay. And
good morning, Good morning, Hearing Officer Sam Crano and Rex Bozier for staff in Carson City.
Okay. And for the company?
Good morning, Hearing Officer Wenzel. I'm Sean Elisegi with NV Energy. With me is Gary Smith, the Director of Customer Energy Solutions, Dr. Yakov Skolnikov, Managing Engineer with Exponent, and Dr. William P. Bailey, Principal Scientist with Exponent.
Thank you. And Mr. Gold.
Barry Gold with AARP Nevada.
And Janie Griesmeister with AARP.
And Mr. Steff?
Thank you. Good morning, Hearing Officer Wenzel. Paul Stuff in Las Vegas. And I believe we have Mr. Norris in Carson City. I'll let him make his appearance on the record.
And this is Dave Norris, and with me is Robert Cooper.
The record will reflect that the notice of investigation regarding NV Energy's Advanced Service Delivery Program and the notice of request for comments and the notice of workshop was made on or about November 9th, 2011. The Commission has in its files affidavits of publication for the notice of this workshop. Are there any persons present that wish to examine those affidavits or have any concerns related to the notice of this workshop? Hearing no request, the Commission deems this matter duly and properly noticed for a workshop at this time and place. By way of background, this workshop is going to be the first of 2 smart meter workshops that the Commission will hold. This first workshop will address the written and reply comments related to smart meter concerns in the areas of health and safety, privacy and security, accuracy and reliability, and customer service as it relates to notification, installation, and NV Energy callbacks regarding smart meters. While all members of the public are welcome to attend this workshop today, any interested person who would like to comment today was required to have submitted comments to the Commission on or before Friday, November 18th, 2011 by 12:00 p.m. The Commission intends to issue a second request for comments and will conduct a second workshop on January 18th, 2012, specifically addressing whether to adopt an opt-out process. Therefore, anyone that submitted comments that were received by the Commission after the November 18th deadline for this workshop, but prior to the deadline for the next workshop, will still have an opportunity to participate in the second workshop. The reason the Commission requested comments in writing in this docket and in advance of the hearing was to ensure that the company would be able to reply to those comments and we would get your questions answered. Clearly, we can't do all of that today if it's the first time we're hearing the questions. So that was to help to have an efficient process here today. NV Energy did file very detailed reply comments addressing the concerns that were raised in those comments. And lastly, to ensure that interested persons receive information regarding this smart meter investigation, we encourage you to register with our Commission's service list for this docket, and it's docket again 11-10007. If you've already signed up to be on the service list, but you have not been receiving information to date, please check with the front office during a break or on your way out today to make sure that we had sufficient contact information. Many people did not file addresses, full name, and information that we need to actually put you on a service list and mail you information. So that's the procedures. Substantively, how we're going to proceed today is in 3 parts. We do have a presentation from MV Energy. Now, whereas I know most of you, like myself, probably read every page that was submitted by the company, I'm trying to put it in summary form for you today to kind of set the stage of what we're talking about. So we're going to have a presentation by the company, and then after that, it's going to be time for commission questions, and that means questions from those of us sitting up at the dais. And then after that, we will get comments from our public entities here at the table, our staff, BCP, ARB, and then we'll take your comments. I have an alphabetized list of everyone that filed comments timely in this docket. Therefore, I will call on people alphabetically and have you come up to the podium right here that's in the center. There will be a representative from our consumer division. Andy, again, is here at the corner. In case we have some folks in hearing room B and they need time to get into A, if you're hearing me in hearing room B, or in Carson City, I will make sure that everyone has time to get into the appropriate position so we can get your comments down. And we will also be limiting comments to 5 minutes. There'll be a clock. I think it's going to be above my head. I'm not sure. We'll see how this goes. I can see it in front of me, but I understand you will be able to see it as well. Because based on the number of people that have filed written comments, even if I give everybody 5 minutes, we'll be here till the wee hours. So I'm trying to facilitate this the best that I can, and I again ask for all of your cooperation as we move forward here today. And those are all my introductory comments. So at this time, I will turn it over to the company to start their presentation.
Thank you, Hearing Officer. Before we begin, could I ask that while we don't object to the video camera, do we have the light on the camera shut off?
Yes.
Because it is shining directly into my eyes as well as the eyes of our presenters.
Absolutely.
Thank you. We have a 2-pronged presentation today. The first is given by Mr. Smith. It addresses several of the questions that the Commission posed in its procedural order. The second prong of the presentation will be given by Dr. Skolnikov and Dr. Bailey, specifically addressing health considerations. It's important to recognize before we begin some of Dr. Bailey and Dr. Skolnikov's qualifications. Dr. Skolnikov holds a PhD from Princeton University in electrical engineering. He is a member of the IEEE, International Committee on Electromagnetic Safety, Subcommittee 4, safety levels with respect to human exposure to radio frequency fields, and that is in the 3 kilohertz to 300 gigahertz range. He has also conducted multiple evaluations of RF exposure, signal strength, and interference for cell phone towers, smart meter systems, and medical devices. Dr. Bailey holds a PhD in neuropsychology from the University of New York. He sits on the same subcommittee for safety levels with respect to human exposure to radio frequency fields. He is the associate editor of Health Physics. He's primarily responsible in that role for peer review of manuscripts describing the results of research on electromagnetic fields, and he's conducted several human risk assessments of RF exposure. It's equally important to recognize some of the background of this proceeding. The Commission has conducted 3 proceedings, which included an integrated resource plan proceeding, a proceeding addressing the company's proposal for a voluntary dynamic pricing trial, as well as a rulemaking proceeding to establish consumer protections that relate to the ASD project. In those 3 proceedings, the Commission conducted 5 separate consumer sessions. Finally, it is important to recognize that the evidentiary proceeding that the Commission conducted in 2010 addressed benefits from the Smart Grid program, specifically customer benefits such as those benefits that flow from energy efficiency, those benefits that flow from reduced operating expenses, and those benefits that flow from reliability impacts of the Smart Grid program. With that, I will turn the presentation to Mr. Smith, who will address certain topics asked by the Commission.
And let me just make sure that we have both of these documents available in the hearing room here. Mr. Elisegi, did you make these two documents available?
We did, Hearing Officer.
Okay, so, and in Carson City as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I will, for ease of reference, the Smart Grid for Nevada document provided by NV Energy PUCN Workshop 12/6/2011, I will mark as Exhibit 1, and the perspective on public health and safety concerns about RF signals from NV Energy's AMI network will be marked as Workshop Exhibit 2. Please proceed.
Hearing Officer Wenzel, thank you for your time today. I'm here to talk to you about the overall program being implemented by NV Energy. It's a smart grid program for Nevada. It's a statewide program being constructed through the years of 2010 through 2012. It serves 1.3 million electric customers throughout the state of Nevada and 150,000 gas modules, which will be replaced in northern Nevada. It benefits 2.4 million Nevadans over a 46,000 square mile service territory. Overall cost of the program is $303 million. We do have a smart grid investment grant. We were one of 100 utilities to receive such a grant. This is administered through the Department of Energy for $139 million. The annual steady state benefits of the program are $35 million. We did receive a Public Utilities Commission to proceed with the project July 30th of 2010. There's two aspects of the program, which include a voluntary demand response program and a voluntary dynamic pricing trial, which will start in January of 2013. Smart grid means a lot to different companies or different utilities. And on the next page, page 2, kind of gives you the vision of the smart grid for Nevada. This is the same diagram that we showed back in the hearings in 2010, where NV Energy's view of the smart grid is a view from the customer perspective. It's allowing customers to take and have information to take ownership of their energy usage. And there's lots of elements of this strategy. And this is a strategy where it's a basic infrastructure that will be built out over time, but it does have some implementation that is being constructed now. These include pricing options for customers. These are voluntary pricing options. Being able to facilitate distributed renewables, net metering, as those grow out in our service territories, home area networks, enhanced demand response programs, which are, all these programs are voluntary. It does include advanced metering, which is two-way communications from a private and secure communications network. It does have automated gas modules in northern Nevada. It does have another base program, which is a web portal that allows customers to view their information on a daily basis. The program also facilitates the future of electric vehicles, which are now starting to enter our market. On page 4 is a consumer confidence plan. This is the same consumer confidence plan we reviewed back in the hearings, and we've been implementing throughout the project. It's a 6-step process. NV Energy is what we call a fast follower. Other utilities have gone before us in implementing smart grid initiatives. But one thing that we have learned is not all utilities are the same, not all equipment is the same. So we're customizing this process to Nevada. It does include security and safety, privacy, accuracy, ensuring that we have a prudent process for meter deployment, verification that we're installing and verifying that the metering equipment is accurate, and ownership for our customers as we deploy. You can see off to the left of this slide is part of this process is third-party review and surveying from UNLV, where we have 90.8% of our customers that are aware that smart meters are being installed. 96.3% reported that there was no issues with installation problems. And on a scale of a 5-point scale, 5 indicating very satisfied, we're currently rated at a 3.9 according to that survey. The footnote on this is about 12 weeks of survey data. Each week UNLV surveys 30 customers, and we're in about the 17th week in a process where now we're surveying on a weekly basis. On page 5 is security. NV Energy has been executing a cybersecurity plan. This plan was approved by the U.S. Department of Energy. The Department of Energy has done an on-site evaluation of this plan as we progress in its implementation. The cybersecurity plan is guided by appropriate standards, best practices, and ongoing security testing. It does include firewalls, a virtual private network. It has meter encryption for all meters used for the automated and customer billing process. We have engaged a third party to come in and evaluate our cybersecurity as deployed, and we're continuing to work with that firm on mitigation. That's a continuous process. We understand that security, just like on our home computer, changes every day, and having third parties help us with that assessment is vital. We also have set up a staff, we call it a Security Operations Center, that is monitoring this network on a 24/7 basis. On page 6 is customer safety. You're going to have another presentation on customer health and safety in a few minutes. But each element of the Energy AMI network has been certified by the FCC. This was part of our evaluation up front and brought forward in the original hearings. Each element of the NV Energy AMI network has been verified by a third party. They're here today to talk to you about the findings of that study, and we are below the FCC exposure limits for the entire network. NV Energy's AMI network produces RF exposure levels at least 15,000 times lower than the FCC exposure limit. The NV Energy electric smart meters on a typical transmit is about 3 seconds per day. The gas modules is about 1 second per day of transmit. If you look at the little chart below, you can see our entire network as it compares to other common RF exposure. For instance, the Earth itself is 3.4 times greater than our overall network in exposure. The human body is 7.9 times greater. A Wi-Fi network, 26 times greater. A microwave oven being used for 1 minute is 120 times greater. A cordless phone use of 3 minutes is 3,200 times greater. And a cell phone is 5,000 times greater than our overall network. Again, an in-depth review of that will be taking place here in a few minutes. As far as customer privacy, there's a few myths on the internet that we want to dispel. And again, every network is different. Implementations across the country may vary, but these are the facts about privacy of the NV Energy system. We only collect whole house usage that is metered by NV Energy. So it's only the whole house, it's not the individual equipment within the home. NV Energy has taken and will continue to take reasonable and appropriate steps to protect this customer-sensitive data. Smart meters do not track or record individual appliances usage. Smart meters record whole house usage, just like our old digital meters. They just collect it more often. NV Energy does not transmit personally identifiable information. It only transmits the usage information. NV Energy may not provide a list of names, addresses, or telephone numbers of its customers or related information about its customers to any other person for commercial purposes. Again, this AMI network only transmits the customer's usage information. Page 8 is accuracy. NV Energy smart meters have 3 levels of accuracy verification. The first one is standards compliance. All meters comply with the American National Standards Institute of Standards for Accuracy and Safety. We've also have a certification through the University of Nevada, Reno, where they have third-party tested the meters for accuracy. Our acceptance tests of these meters have multiple steps. First being first article testing. This is an industry standard set of tests that our electrical metering engineers complete on each meter before it's manufactured. Each meter that is manufactured, once that meter is approved, then is tested at the factory, and those test results for every meter is received by our meter operations group and verified for accuracy. We sample test 5% of every shipment that comes in of the smart meters, and we test those and validate for reliability and safety, and we do periodic testing. On page 9 is verification. This is another important process. NV Energy verifies the billing accuracy after new meters are installed. All new meters are read manually by the meter reader at least one time after the smart meter is installed. The manual read is compared to the automated read to verify its accuracy. Potential high and low usage is flagged and reviewed by our billing analysts to determine root cause and resolution before the bills are sent to customers. A factual comment here on page 9. As of October 10th of 2011, we had 525,000 bills that have been processed, with a 0.59% that had reached those flags, where we manually corrected those bills before they reached customers. These are primarily due to bad meter reading errors. These exceptions have nothing to do with the smart meter itself. We've had 60 escalated high bill complaints where smart meters were removed at the customer's request and tested in our shop, and all 100% of those meters were found to meet the ANSI standard. On page 10 is our customer outreach program. This is a program that we've spent a lot of time and learned from a lot of utilities on how to deploy smart meters. It starts with community awareness. We've completed over 60 community presentations on the program. We provide a letter to our customers, a phone call to our customers. We knock on the door. After we install the meter, we leave a document on the door that indicates that we've successfully installed their meter, and we do post-satisfaction surveying. As of October 31st, we had 580,000 meters deployed. We had completed 99.63% of the scheduled smart meter installations. Of the completion of those installations, 99.85% of those were accomplished without repair complaints and claims of post-installation or field issues. We've had less than 0.25% of these meters, it's about 1,300 meters, that have been returned due to failure and were returned under warranty. A big part of this program on page 11 is to turn the system over to the customers to allow them to take ownership of their energy usage. 47% of our customers now are my account customers, so they're able to view their information on a daily basis. If you look at the graphic off to the right, we can now provide customers their cost on a daily basis and an estimated projection of their bill at the end of the month. In focus groups, this was the #1 requirement that customers were asking of the company. As you can imagine, we're a peaking utility, and customer bills in the summer times can reach, can double or triple. And being able to see their energy usage on a daily basis can really help in management of those bills. There's 3 levels of benefits from ownership. There's a learning benefit, there's a managing benefit, where now we're able to provide this information in an alert format, much like your banking industry with your bank information. You can send out alerts and say, hey, I've reached a certain threshold on my energy usage, dollar amount, and actually receive alert messaging of where you're at on your billing cycle. The 3rd level is voluntary choices on demand response programs. Page 12, customers can learn my account views of private and secure usage information. This gives you a couple views of that information. First chart shows temperature with daily energy usage. Second chart shows the 15-minute interval data, where customers then can look at cost and their usage information. Page 13 is a couple screenshots we provided for you today on alert functionality, as well as an iPhone app that's being developed under the program. Page 14 has to do with Northern Nevada. Northern Nevada deployment will begin January of 2012. We started the communications infrastructure early in 2011. We will start in the Truckee Meadows, the Reno Sparks area of Northern Nevada. We have started the hiring process with a partnership with IBEW, Local 1245, and Nevada Workforce. In Southern Nevada, we have a partnership with 396, Local 396, that has provided a Nevada workforce. Community outreach is underway. As I mentioned, Reno Sparks will be the first to be deployed. We estimate completion in Northern Nevada in December of 2012 with gas modules and electric meters. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Elisagi?
Next, Dr. Skolnikov and Dr. Bailey will give their presentation.
Thank you. Gentlemen, good morning.
Ms. Wenzel, this is Debbie. I cannot see anybody except the piece of paper, so I do need them to identify themselves each time they speak, please.
Okay, and we'll get, they have a presentation that's going along with it, so you won't be able to see them. So, gentlemen, if you can please identify yourselves. Thank you.
My name is Yakov Shkolnikov.
Can you get a little bit closer to the mic?
Sorry. My name is Yakov Shkolnikov. I'm here with Dr. Bailey to give a perspective with respect to public health and safety concerns that came from the comments regarding the NV Energy AMI network. Next slide, topic. So we'll be discussing 3 topics. The first topic will be to quantify or give to quantify the RF exposure from the smart meter network and supporting infrastructure. Then to discuss the limits and the reasons for the limits for the RF exposure, and then to give an update on the current health research regarding RF signals. Next slide. So the Exponent's role in this is to serve as a resource to provide calculations regarding the RF fields from AMI network, to identify relevant exposure standards and guidelines, explain scientific rationale for the guidances and from the multiple national and international health agencies, and also to respond to some specific public comments that have been raised. Next slide. So this slide gives some key facts about the NV Energy AMI network. So one thing to consider when, if you do a web search, there are a lot of different numbers reported for different networks, smart meter or other AMI networks. It is important to remember that every smart meter network is different. It differs by the design of the network, the density of houses, and how often the utility information is retrieved. So one of the key differences of NV Energy AMI network from many other ones is it doesn't actually use a mesh grid. 99% of the meters on the network to communicate directly to the tower. In a current configuration, about 1% use a mix. They primarily communicate directly to the tower, but if there's a communication interruption, what they will do is they will send a signal to nearby meter, and then that meter will directly transmit it to the tower as well. This design results in a very low exposure and transmission duration of this network. And also it's important to know that even before these devices are installed at a house, all of them have passed FCC compliance testing dealing with both interference issues with devices that you may have in a house and from the point of view of exposure and from the health perspective. Next slide. So just to give you an overview of the devices on the AMI network, there's a tower. There are about 70 in the current deployment, and these towers are the location to which smart meters transmit their utility information before they're passed on to the NV Energy. The towers receive this information from electric smart meter, and there may also be a gas meter that communicates as well, depending on the location, and if the gas meter is offered by NV Energy. There are also two optional interfaces. The electric smart meter can send utility information, the usage information to the control interface, or to, and thermostat can also communicate with that control interface, but again, those components are optional. Next slide. To give a perspective of the frequencies that are used by the NV Energy AMI network, the communication from meter to tower is at 896 to 960 megahertz. The signals from the meter to the optional control and control panel and thermostat are 2.4 gigahertz. Both of those frequencies are well below visible UV or other high energy electromagnetic fields. Next slide. So to give for the rest of the presentation, we'll be talking about exposure. And I just want to give an idea of how is exposure defined by FCC and by Code of Federal Regulations. The exposure is basically the amount of average energy that reaches per area that reaches a human body. It's typically measured in milliwatts per centimeter squared, which is basically 1/1000th of a watt, reaching an area of the size of a fingernail. And the standard also wants to take into account for the total duration and in a 30-minute period, so the standard also defines that the exposure per FCC is defined as average over 30 minutes. Next slide. So to perform the analysis we have of the exposure, we have taken a typical scenario, which is a household which has, for the purpose of calculation, both gas and electric smart meter. It has also a Zigbee module, this module that can communicate with the optional network thermostat and control panel. We have assumed that those are, the home area network is actually not turned on. Those optional devices are not installed and only considered the parts of the network which are standard. We looked at exposure at 1 foot in front of the smart meter panel and 1 foot behind the smart meter panel, and the 1 foot behind is typically indoors, a few inches from the outside wall. The exposure in front of the panel outside of the house is about 1/15,000th of the FCC exposure limit, and the typical exposure indoors is about 450,000th of the FCC exposure limit. There's obviously a tower exposure also present, but that, the typical distances from the tower are very, very low, about 1/5 of the FCC exposure limit. Next slide. So we just to give a perspective of where this total exposure lies compared to common RF exposure sources that you may encounter every day. All these exposures were calculated under typical exposure, so we assume that you're making about 2 to 3 minutes phone call, or you're heating something in the microwave for 1 minute. So this wasn't, we weren't assuming these appliances were on constantly just for a small fraction of the time. If you do comparison on the On the high end, you have a cell phone, which is very close to your body, so that results in a very, very high exposure, about 5,000 times greater than all the appliances on the AMI network, all the devices on the AMI network. And then as you go down, you actually get down to the Earth exposure. Earth actually produces exposure about 3.4 times greater than the NV energy appliance. And your own body actually, or the body of somebody who is visiting you, actually results in about 7.9 times greater exposure. Next slide. One of the comments that was posed, and also there is questions, well, why is there a natural exposure from the ground and from the human body? And this has actually been known for almost 100 years. For example, on the bottom left-hand side, I show two images of the Earth. This is NASA satellites. This is on the left-hand side is what the satellites see from the Earth in the IR regime, where a majority of the electromagnetic fields coming from the Earth are. And then the image right to the right of it is actually what the satellites that look only at radio frequency from the Earth see. This is about 10 to 85 gigahertz. And this is what the image of the Earth looks like from space. This is the emissions from the Earth. Human body images are shown on the right. The top is IR, again, that's the majority of the electromagnetic fields. But below it is an image of a human body in RF frequency range, 80 to 100 gigahertz. And again, you can see, the human body here is clearly identifiable in the image. Next slide. There were some concerns regarding medical devices and what smart meter interfere with the therapy of the medical devices. And the answer is, obviously, medical device users should always follow advice from the doctor or from medical device manufacturer. And that's, regardless of the transmitter type, whether it's a smart meter, Wi-Fi, cell phone, cordless phone, or other device. But as I'll show next to slides, that there's nothing unusual about smart meters or some specific concern that should be about them. So next slide. So specifically, there were a few comments on cardiac pacemaker and other cardiac devices. Again, there should not be a specific concern about smart meters. Pacemakers and ICD manufacturers recommend a minimum of 6 inches distance to a mobile phone. But as a comparison, at the interior of the house, at a 1 foot distance from the smart meter panel, the peak signal strength from the smart meter will be approximately 25 times lower than a cell phone at the 6 inches distance reference. Next slide. So for other medical devices, again, you should follow medical device manufacturers' recommendations. This was one specific comment voiced a concern about Medtronic neurostimulator, which stimulates the nerves in your body. It's an implant that goes inside your body. And this is just a screenshot of the recommendations directly from the manufacturer's manual to a patient manual. And it says that the following devices should not interfere in one of the Sensus television, AM radios, stereos, and cellular phones. Again, the smart meters communicate in similar frequency as cellular phones, but you will typically have much lower peak values, peak field values at your body. Next slide. There were also some comments worried about the power quality resulting from the fact that a smart meter rather than an analog meter is installed. All the smart meters used by NV Energy have passed conducted emissions test, which tests how much noise is injected or is conducted from the smart meter to the power line. And all the smart meters passed the compliance testing. They also were tested for how much they emit outside the frequency in which they communicate, which is everything that's outside 900 megahertz and 2.45 gigahertz frequency range. And also, some comments suggested that smart meters somehow produce or send out ELF signal. That is not the case. There's no 1 hertz to 3 kilohertz fields that are being sent out or used by the smart meters for communication. Next slide. There was also some comments that were concerned about the effects of pulsed electromagnetic fields. It is important to know that NV Energy MI network does not use pulse or even pulse modulated RF signals. All it does is that when it doesn't need to send information, there's no information transmitted, it just turns off, the transmitter doesn't send the signal. When it has information to transmit, it turns on, sends a constant amplitude signal, constant strength signal, and then turns off again when not needed. And this is how the microwave oven works. If you set it on not 100% duty cycle, your microwave in your house actually only can heat everything at 100% or 0%. All you're changing by number is how often it turns on and off during a cooking cycle. So my microwave, if I heat it 30 seconds, at 50% power will be off for approximately half of those 30 seconds. Next slide. There was also a question whether how the exposure numbers we have calculated apply to multiple meter installations. As I mentioned earlier, our exposure calculation already assumed that gas and electric meters are installed in a household residence. On the residence, if there's only electric meter, the exposure would be lower. If there's a bank of meter nearby, on your building, the exposure will go up, but if you calculate how many meters you need to exceed the FCC exposure limit, you'll get an unrealistic estimate of about 23,000 electric smart meters within a foot distance of you, or 83,000 if you're looking just gas meters. Also, the exposure from nearby houses in your neighborhood are negligible because you're just so far and the signal strength will drop so rapidly that they just don't add to overall exposure. Next slide. So in conclusion, the NV Energy MI network results in negligible RF exposure compared to other commonly encountered RF sources. So here I list a few national standards. At the top is FCC exposure limit, which is approximately 1 milliwatt per centimeter squared, all the way to other countries' standards, which is go down to 0.01 milliwatts per centimeter squared. And NV Energy AMI network devices are just much lower than the exposures in any of those standards.
My name is Dr. William Bailey, and I will be continuing the presentation to discuss aspects of the relevant exposure standards and a perspective on public health and safety of radio frequency fields. First thing I'd like to go over is the scientific basis for the standard. I have on this next slide outlined the historical development of the FCC standard. And the American National Standards Institute in 1982 published a standard which was then adopted by the FCC in 1985. After 1985, standard setting activities progressed in various places of the world. The National Council on Radiation Protection, which is commissioned by Congress in the United States, started working on a standard in 1981, published that standard in 1986. And in 1996, the FCC took the ANSI standard and the NCRP standard and took elements of both, and that became the FCC standard. Now, the FCC is a technical agency which is involved with the control and oversight and regulation of radio frequency fields. It is not a health agency, but as part of the development of its standard, it had significant input and guidance from public health agencies, including the Environmental Protection Agency, the Food and Drug Administration, the NCRP. Also in 1993, the World Health Organization had released a major review of research on biological and potential health effects of radio frequency fields, which was known. And also the ANSI and IEEE contributed guidance to the FCC. And next slide, please. Now, one of the steps in developing the standard, because I think there's a lot of confusion about this, the first step would be to comprehensively characterize the exposure that is the target of the standard. In the case of radio frequency, we're talking about the frequency of the fields, the intensities, other characteristics that might determine how these fields interact with the environment. Next, you do a comprehensive review of the scientific evidence. As you're well aware, one can reach biased conclusions by only looking at part of the evidence. And so the standard procedure from agencies when we're preparing a regulation is to look at all of this evidence and evaluate the weight of the evidence according to its quality. And that weight of the evidence is to identify, in the case of a standard like this, is the lowest observed adverse effect level. That is, what is the level of exposure that produces an adverse effect at the lowest intensity. And having determined that adverse effect, then you take into account other factors that may reflect the variability in the population. Do the responses of individuals vary with their age, the sex, or the environment, or some kind of factors that influence your uncertainty about the exposure they might receive, or variations in health sensitivity. Having completed that, one sets an exposure limit, which would be a fraction of the level at which adverse health effects are observed. Next slide, please. I talked a little bit about reviewing the evidence. Performing a scientific weight of the evidence review involves, as I said before, conducting a systematic search of the literature. And there are three types of studies that we rely on. We have epidemiologic studies of human populations, which have the advantage that they're dealing with always with human subjects. The uncertainty is that we do not have control over the exposures and the characteristics of those individuals, and so that is a complicating factor. Then we have experimental studies in which humans or animals or cells and tissues can be exposed to known levels of radio frequency fields and to make observations about responses. These studies have the advantage of being able to control and isolate confounding factors and are more easily able to draw conclusions about cause and effect relationships. Again, all of these studies are evaluated for their individual strengths and weaknesses, and then the results of these studies are combined together in a way to make an overall risk assessment. Next slide. The basis for the FCC standard, that literature review indicated that the adverse effect that should be the focus of the standard was body heating. So as the intensity of exposure to radio frequency fields increased, the adverse effect that occurs at the lowest intensity is heating of the body. As you go up to much higher intensities of exposures, cell damage, organ malfunction, and even burns could occur. Those would all be above the threshold for adverse effects. So the threshold for adverse effects is defined as a level that produces behavioral disruption, and that occurs at a rate of heating of the body called the specific absorption rate of about 4 watts per kilogram. And that results in a, for whole body exposure, an increase in body temperature of about 1 degree. Next slide. There's also, the question was raised as to whether the FCC and other agencies that have set standards considered the possibility that there might be biological effects, or in particular adverse effects, at levels lower than that which produce obvious body heating. And the answer is yes. These agencies have considered evidence at levels above and below the known threshold, but they did not find that the evidence supported the idea that there were adverse effects at levels below that that caused adverse body heating. Next slide. To give you an idea as to how the FCC maximum permissible exposure was derived from this threshold, I show in this graph where it indicates in the orange bar the specific absorption rate at which whole body heating occurs, and that is the threshold, 4 watts per kilogram. The FCC then set the permitted exposure or dose to a worker in an occupational environment 10 times below that. And the general public was set a level 5 times below that. So the exposure to the general public that is allowable under the FCC standard is 50 times below this specific absorption rate of 4 watts per kilogram. Next slide. The FCC standard is protective of public health because it prevents exposures that are known to be harmful. The standard is supported by the consistency with other national standards and also by reviews by independent scientific and health agencies. Next slide. Supporting basis for the FCC standard includes other major standards that have the same basic assumptions regarding the threshold for adverse effects and how to set the exposure limits for occupational and worker exposures. And these organizations include the International Committee on Electromagnetic Safety, it's a division of the IEEE, the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, and also many other countries have developed similar standards. I would point out that the ICNIRP standard is applied throughout the more than 30 countries of the European Union. Next slide. Next, we'll discuss a perspective from a scientist view of the comments that were filed with the Commission. Next slide. One of the categories of comments concerned general health concerns. Headaches were mentioned by a number of people, insomnia. One person mentioned tingling in the face and ringing in the ears. When you review the scientific literature to see what support there is for radio frequency fields at levels in our general environment, whether it be from smart meters or other sources causing such effects, we surveyed reviews by 5 national and international agencies that did not find supporting evidence that radio frequency fields would be causing these symptoms. And also, we point out that the radio frequency exposures from these smart meters are really too low to be a plausible cause of such complaints. Next slide. A number of comments also raise the issue about so-called electrical hypersensitivity. That is, persons who perceive behavioral or health sensitivity to radio frequency fields, whether they're from smart meters or other sources. Again, if you look to the reviews of scientific research that have been performed by 5 national and international agencies, they find that the evidence fails to support the existence of an RF or EMF cause for complaints. That's based upon the finding that persons self-identified with electrical hypersensitivity do not reliably detect or react to RF exposures in experimental studies differently from other people, nor can they determine whether or not the exposure is present. And some studies even report that EHS persons can exhibit the same symptoms even though that there is no RF signal source present. Next slide. NV Energy also requested Dr. James Kornberg to provide a medical perspective on this, and here is the conclusion of his filing. He states, a survey of the scientific literature on the subject of an environmental hypersensitivity, or to use the term idiopathic environmental intolerance, which has been recommended by the World Health Organization because there is no demonstrated link with electromagnetic fields, leads to the conclusion that there is no proven human hypersensitivity to EMF categorically, and in particular the power densities and frequencies associated with the NV Energy AMI network. Next slide. Now, one of the questions that is asked by individuals that I speak with, and maybe echoed here as well, is why conclusions about health must depend upon reviews by national and international agencies. An individual can go out and pull off the internet comments from any individual or read a few studies. And the question is, can we draw reliable and valid conclusions from a few studies? First of all, as I mentioned, the problem may be is that is not enough information. The second thing is that even though that a study has reported a finding, it is necessary to verify that a number of different times by different scientists in different places before we can accept that as being perhaps a true finding. Next slide, please. The problem with identifying a, quote, true finding is exemplified in an article that appeared in the Wall Street Journal. This article was prompted by an issue of the American journal Science, which is a premier scientific journal here in the United States, that was calling attention to the problem of the lack of reproducibility of scientific results. And what they comment here is, in this article in the Wall Street Journal about science, is that when published medical findings can't be validated by others, there are major consequences. Next slide. An example they gave in the article was that when the pharmaceutical company Bayer asked their scientists to validate studies that had been published in the scientific literature with the idea that they would then, if in fact they could replicate these findings, this might provide an avenue for new drug research. Over 2/3 of the studies that they attempted to replicate failed, and another 12% could only be partially replicated. So this is an example of why even the publication of a few studies on a particular topic may not give you a very strong guidance as to what really may be going on. Next slide, please. The other issue that comes to mind that also affects the literature in bioelectromagnetics and in this area is the problem of cherry picking the studies. A number of the comments cited opinions and excerpts of writings from a number of different scientists who were involved in producing an online document called the Bioinitiative Report. And the Bioinitiative Report has called for a lowering of the standards for exposure to radio frequency fields by perhaps a factor of 1,000 or 10,000. And one has to look at what is the quality and objectivity of the evidence which is provided in this document. I've given an example of the opinion of the Health Council of the Netherlands, who said, in view of the way the Bioinitiative Report was compiled, the selective use of scientific data, and other shortcomings mentioned above, the committee concludes the Bioinitiative Report is not an objective and balanced reflection of the current state of scientific knowledge. Therefore, the report does not provide any grounds for revising the current views as to the risk of exposure to electromagnetic fields. And there are other health agencies that we cite in our report that echo this. Next slide, please. One of the comments that was, topic of comments that was very common was concerns about cancer. Next slide. Many persons filed a form letter with the Commission that pointed to a review of research on radio frequency fields that was performed by the International Agency for Research on Cancer for the World Health Organization. If you followed this at all, you'll realize that a lot of the emphasis in this report was on cancer concerns arising from statistical associations between the estimated use of cell phones and certain types of cancer. The reviews of this research by 5 national and international agencies, including WHO and IR, do not conclude that radio frequency exposure is a health risk. The IR classification was largely based on the absence of data that continued perhaps for 15 or 20 years of use. Mobile phones have not been around long enough for us to have 15 or 20 years of data. And that was a caution that they brought up. Next slide. Now, the IARC review, in its assessment of all the scientific research, then classifies the evidence in the following categories. And the category in which radio frequency fields was assigned was the category 2B, which is possibly carcinogenic to humans. And the way that it got to be into the 2B category was almost entirely based upon these human epidemiology studies of cell phone use. And they found that those studies provided limited evidence for an association between the use of cell phones and certain types of cancer, brain cancer, and so on, cancers of the head and neck. But they could not rule out the contribution of chance, bias, or confounding by other factors in these results. And I think it's important to understand that those epidemiology studies that were done were performed in a way using a particular design in which you take a group of persons with a disease and a group of persons without the disease, and they were asked about their cell phone use in the past. And obviously, recollections about someone's cell phone use were to have a degree of uncertainty about that. A study came out after the IARC report in which they actually had access to the records of mobile phone use, and that study did not show an association either. But it's noteworthy that they did not conclude that the use of mobile phones was probably carcinogenic or carcinogenic to humans. All they said was that the evidence suggested a possibility that there may be an association, and that should be looked at further. Next slide. Another health agency which is historically long been involved in the review and evaluation of research on radio frequency fields and has published a standard on radio frequency exposures is the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Detection. And here is an excerpt from their major review, which came out in 2009. They said there is no direct link between RF exposure and genotoxic effects, such as DNA mutations, DNA strand breaks, or other genetic lesions. Experimental evidence from animal and laboratory studies at the cellular level confirm the lack of genotoxic effect of radio frequency. Similarly, investigations in rodents do not support the suggestion that the growth of tumors induced by other agents, such as ionizing radiation or chemicals, may be promoted by RF exposure from mobile phone signals. Next slide. The World Health Organization put out a fact sheet following the release of the WHO IARC report. And I have excerpted from that fact sheet their conclusions regarding effects of radio frequency fields on brain electrical activity, cognitive function, sleep, heart rate, and blood pressure in volunteers. They say, to date, research does not suggest any consistent evidence of adverse health effects from exposure to radio frequency fields at levels below those that cause tissue heat. They go on to say, further, research has not been able to provide support for a causal relationship between exposure to electromagnetic fields and self-reported symptoms or electromagnetic hypersensitivity. And finally, they say several large multinational epidemiologic studies have been completed or are ongoing. The international pooled analysis of data gathered from 13 participating countries, that's so-called interphone study mentioned in our report, found no increased risk of glioma or meningioma with mobile phone use. These are types of brain tumors. of more than 10 years of use. There are some indications of increased risk of glioma for those who reported the highest 10% of cumulative hours of cell phone use, although there was no consistent trend of increasing risk with increasing duration of use. Next slide. Now, a number of agencies have looked at their records on the incidence of brain tumors with regard to mobile phone use, because the mobile phone is held very close to the head, and it has been introduced at a specific point in time, roughly in the early 1980s. And so here is a screenshot of a graph that was presented by Dr. Peter Inskip of the U.S. National Cancer Institute, in which he looks at the number of subscribers using mobile phones over time, going up to, I think, 2006. And you can see in the top graph a steady increase in the number of users of cell phones. And below that, he plots the annual incidence of brain tumors. And you can see that over that period of time, before and since the introduction of the cell phones, there has been no essential change in that rate. Now, cell phones have been evaluated in these studies for only 10 years. Of course, as scientists, we would like to have, to be able to look at records like this over a period of 15 or 20 years. We don't have that data yet, but as time goes on, we will. Next slide. Now, radio frequency fields are produced by many different sources. The questions that have been raised about one particular source, in this case smart meters, have been looked at by a number of different agencies. The FCC itself has issued a comment letter about exposures and safety of smart meters. The Monterey County Health Department, the California Public Utility Commission, the California Council on Science and Technology, and the Maine Center for Disease Control and Prevention have all reviewed issues relating to health and safety aspects of smart meter use, and they all agree that the exposures are very low and well below the FCC RF limits and are unlikely to pose any health threats. Next slide. So we have a consensus among health and scientific agencies that high levels of radio frequency fields can have adverse health effects, with the lowest confirmed effect resulting from tissue heating. And the research today has not established that there are effects of radio frequency fields at lower levels of exposure or mechanisms that would predict harm. Next slide. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you. We will now take questions from the commission. I'll start to my right. Mr. Davis, I'd go first.
Thank you. A few questions here. I think this is for Mr. Smith. Would you go through, you know, could you explain ANSI, who ANSI is, the organization, how it's composed, and how the standards are developed for things like meters?
ANSI is the American Standards Institute. ANSI actually derives standards, particularly for smart meters, and it's a body formulated to guide utility standards that come in not only from the utility industry, but from other agencies as well.
And is there a metering group for ANSI? How's that?
Say that again?
Is there a metering group from ANSI?
Yes, there is. Yeah.
And do they also look at analog meters?
Yes, they do. Yes.
And do they look at the accuracy of the meters?
Yes, they do. Yeah.
And the accuracy for the smart meters, how from an ANSI perspective, how does that compare with the analog meters?
They're equivalent, analog and the smart meter itself. You know, you'll have a better accuracy standard or rate with a smart meter over an analog, as the analogs are mechanical and will slow down over time.
And what is the accuracy level of these smart meters?
It's 0.5%.
And was that the same also for the analog meters?
That's correct.
In reviewing your filing, you showed that, let's see if I can find, excuse me for a second. I think it was on page 21, table 2, you showed the failure rates for the meters once they were installed, you know, for the past year or so.
That's correct.
And that failure rate, was that, what percentage of that? I think it was like less than 2.2%.
0.2%.
Okay, was that expected?
You know, industry standards sitting at about 0.5, what we've seen over the industry. So we're running below that what we've seen, yeah.
And I think most of the failures were due to infant mortality. Maybe explain what infant mortality is.
Infant mortality is basically a meter that stops operating in its first several months of operation. There's lots of different reasons a meter can fail. It could be something within the meter, it could be a display on the meter, it could be part of the communications. The accuracy, however, we have not seen an accuracy issue with the meter.
And how did this failure rate compare with, let's say, with the analog meters?
Analog meters are sitting at about 0.4 overall for our system.
So it's lower?
It is lower, you know, different quantities of meters out there, different life. I mean, these are brand new.
And I noticed that, I think, I'm not going to go back with us, that there was about 50 or 60 meters that were asked for recalibration, is that okay?
Yeah, 60.
And do you get requests for recalibrations of the analog meters?
Yes, we do.
And what percentage of, give us a percentage of analog meters you get, you know, over the course of a year you get asked for recalibration?
I don't know the percentage offhand, but during our high bill season, you get the same kind of, about the same volume.
Okay. So you basically, you're not, from a meter accuracy or meter point of view, you see that the smart meters are at least performing right now as good or better than the analog meters, is that right?
We're very proud of the success rate so far with the meters that we're deploying this.
Okay. A couple of questions in the security area. Okay. Walk us through, you know, once once the data comes in, first of all, let's start from the beginning. How many meters have been installed in Southern Nevada, what percentage so far?
We've got about 650,000 meters installed in Southern Nevada.
And is that, how many more meters you have to install or, you know, to complete the
For
task?
residential, there's about 750,000.
So you have another 100,000 to go?
Yeah, and there's about 100,000 commercial.
Let's see, okay. And how many of those meters are you reading now remotely and, you know, you're not using meter readers on?
About 450,000.
Okay. And I guess what you mentioned that the other 250,000, you go through, you read it the first time, and then after that it goes to the remote operation.
Yes.
Okay. And then once you receive the data, okay, why don't you walk us through once the data is received, how you keep the data and how you secure that data to ensure that it's it's somewhat confidential from a public perspective.
I think that's a good question. Here's how that process works. We collect 15-minute interval data from the meters that are out in the field. Those meters are...
Can you move your mic a little bit closer? I'm seeing signals from the public that they can't hear you.
I'm sorry. So the way this process works is we collect 15-minute interval data from the smart meters. That data is stored in the meter. It is transported about every 30 minutes over the AMI encrypted network. So the meters are encrypted, those that are out there ready for billing. We do go through a verification process that first month to make sure that the meter doesn't go through an infant failure. We're watching it, we're manually looking at it. Then we turn it over, we encrypt the meter and turn it over to the system for operation. As far as the security component of that, since it is an encrypted meter itself, it's only transporting that usage information back to our back office. Once it's in the back office, it's then matched back to the address of the particular home or business, and that's in a secured firewalled area. But prior to that, when the data comes up to our tower infrastructure, that is firewalled. It goes off and is transported on a virtual private network that we have. Hits another firewall to ensure that we don't corrupt our back office environment. All associated around cybersecurity standards to ensure we have a secure network.
Well, okay, once the data is in the back office, who has access to that data?
The only people that have access to that are our business analysts type folks that work on the billing environment.
And then how can the public be, how can they be, how can the public be assured that that data is kept confidential once it's in the back office?
In the back office, we have privacy rules. First of all, we cannot supply that data by NEC to third parties. So it can't be sold, it can't be provided. We also go through training of our employees, both our call center employees that may be working with the customer on privacy. Every employee within the company has to go through specific training on privacy standards. That data is in secure back office networks with only those that are authorized to see that data that can use it.
And you say they go through training, but how can the public be assured that, let's say, an individual may not attempt to sell that data to a third party?
We continuously have monitoring of those that are using that information. There's the policy rules are pretty strict, including discipline and termination for misuses of data.
And, okay, is there a way that this data could be turned over to a third party, like say through a subpoena or something like that?
We'll always follow the law, whatever the law requires us to do.
And, well, let me ask this question another way. Let's say a subpoena was issued. Do you have procedures in place at the power company to, maybe this is more for the legal people. You have procedures in place that would address this if the subpoena was issued for the data?
We do, Mr. Davis, and it is the exact same procedure that we follow today in the event we receive a request for data or a subpoena for data from any law enforcement agency.
And what is that?
Those requests are routed to attorneys, and attorneys assess those requests internally for compliance with Nevada law, federal law, depending on the agency that is issuing the subpoena. And if the agency has properly issued the subpoena and the company is obligated to respond to the subpoena, we respond to the request for the subpoena.
And just out of curiosity, if that data is issued to a third party under subpoena, would the individual, the customer, know that that data was being submitted, or how's that work?
It depends on the nature of the law enforcement investigation.
Okay. And just have one other question had to do with the presentation. This is a curiosity question.
Yes.
Who is ICNIRP? You mentioned that in your document. Who is that agency?
That's the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection.
And Dr. Bailey, please identify yourself for the record.
Yes, I'm sorry. Response is provided by Phil Bailey. This organization developed out of a international organization called the International Radiation Protection Association in the 1970s. It's headquartered in Germany, and it has been referenced by the European Commission as the standard-setting organization for all the European countries. And this organization consists of a main group of scientists, and then they have many subcommittees depending upon the topic. They have an epidemiology subcommittee, they have a biological subcommittee, they have an exposure subcommittee, and they also bring in other outside scientists on an ad hoc basis. So these reviews that they submitted, the research and setting the standards can involve dozens of scientists from around the world.
And, you know, in your presentation, Dr. Bailey, you mentioned that, you know, the last portion had to do with cell phones and the relationship with cell phones and possible cancer issues or other issues. And what I understand from, I mispronounce your name, Mr. Shkolnikov, thank you very much. That cell phones that are approximately 5,000, generate approximately 5,000 times the RF intensity is smart meters, is that right?
Yes, they're relative, under typical use, cell phone provides an exposure about 5,000 times greater than NV Energy AMI devices.
And I just was out of curiosity, Doctor, on your presentation, you mentioned you had the smart meter, and you know you're measuring it like 1 foot away from the you know when you did your study. Is there a relationship between RF intensity and distance?
Yes, typically at short distances, the RF strength drops by about a factor of 4 for every doubling of distance. But as you go to larger distances, the furnishings in your house begin to absorb it, and outside trees and houses begin to block it. So it actually falls much more rapidly over larger distance. So, you know, this factor of 3, about a 10 drop in intensity, and after that it could be much, much higher drop off.
That's all the questions I have.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Strauss?
I have no questions, hearing officer.
Thank you. And doctors, just to follow up a little bit on the questions that Mr. Davis asked you, and I guess the general question that I have that I know the answer to, but for purposes of those in the room, given your presentation and the type of review that is done by the FCC and other agencies on RF exposure, what is your understanding of this commission's authority to approve or disapprove RF exposure from smart meters?
I mean, I think the approval, I mean, I'm an engineer, so I'm not a policymaker. I think those decisions are legal and policymakers. I'm not a public policy expert by any definition of the term.
Mr. Elisegi, can you weigh in, please?
Our understanding is that the FCC establishes standards for the exposure of humans to RF fields, and that our products are in compliance with those fields. The Commission has the ability to supervise and address the reasonableness of our practices, but does not have the ability to directly regulate exposure to RF fields.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Turning to your reply comments, these questions are mostly going to be for Mr. Smith. And Mr. Davis, covered the accuracy and reliability areas regarding the meters, but my areas are mostly going to focus on customer confidence with this deployment of smart meters and how the company is doing in that regard. And if we can just, going through your comments, start like on page 6. It states that NV Energy has a specialized call center called the Resolution Center. And I want to talk a little bit about that center. What is that? What does that refer to?
This is Gary Smith. The Resolution Center is a group of specialized employees that can take and talk with customers about the overall program itself. It's located in southern Nevada at our Beltway facility. And the reason for that is that it's close to our operations of the folks that are actually doing the meter deployments, as well as our meter technician folks. So they can get real-time information of what's going on in the field. They can answer specialized questions for customers. We've got a phone number, specialized phone number that's on the information, the letter that the customers can call into.
And let me stop you there.
Sure.
What letter that customers receive? Are you talking about the direct mail notification that's
Yeah.
sent prior to installation of the smart meter?
That's correct. We've got a couple of pieces of information. The direct mailing piece that goes out 30 days prior to deployment. In our public presentations, we provide that phone number as well. On the door hanger, once an installation is complete, a number is on there. So it's a number that's published. The first level of these calls do go into our normal call center at this point. We've trained our call center to respond to high-level questions about the program. But if it gets into a specialized nature, it's directed to the specialized center.
Does this specialized center have a direct phone number?
Yes, it does.
And what is that? Is that the 702? It's a 702 number, correct?
Yeah, 702, 402. Down here. Should have it memorized. 4273.
Can you please repeat that?
702, 402, 4273.
Will there be a number provided for Northern Nevada residents directly, or will their phone calls go into this call center as well with this 702 number, or will you provide a 775 number for up north?
We're actually in the process of setting up a 1-800 number, but we will be specializing a resolution center at that location in the north. We feel that it needs direct contact both with customers and the field people. So it won't be a number that, or a process, we want it close to where the operation is taking place.
And why don't all numbers just go directly to this call center?
Well, we train our employees in the call centers to handle a broad range of information. And for the most part, they can handle this kind of stuff. But we do need a flow over procedure if the questions are more technical in nature.
From reading the comments, the impression that I have is that when customers call NV Energy, they get different responses based on people who answer the phone. I think the company needs to do a better job at training those individuals and getting them into this specialized call center. We need, I'm thinking that the process as it currently stands isn't working. So how exactly are you training these customer service representatives to respond to questions about smart meters? Let me just give you an example. I've read volumes of testimony, and what I am reading is that certain customers call and they're told, well, then they say, I don't want a smart meter. I got the phone call, or I got notification that they're going to install a smart meter on my home. I don't want it. And they're never informed that there's a postponement list, which I've learned about from your comments. And many are told that they have to get it no matter what. That if they don't get it today, they have to get it later, but that it's going to be installed. And it's not unless the customer really pushes them on it, is it, I think, escalated at that point to the resolution center, and then they're put on this postponement list. At least that's what I'm reading between the lines. That may not be 100% accurate, but I think we need to get some more information about how the company is actually training these customers to handle the calls. Do you have any additional information you can give me? What are there? Is there a canned response that they're given? And I don't mean that in a despairingly way. Generally, there's usually the CSRs deal with a lot of problems on a day-to-day basis, and I guess my concern is if it's a general CSR that is taking calls on any number of issues, from billing to outages to smart meters, you may not have the right people responding to those questions, and the same information is not getting out to the public. So can you tell me how they're being trained?
We have a training group that works with our overall project team, that's identifying the opportunities or the training materials. There are scripts, there is training, and this process has kind of evolved over time and taken a step back. When there wasn't a lot of meters deployed, it was a total specialized center. But as the project starts to grow and there's more meters deployed than there is regular meters out there, it became apparent that it was time to start growing that into our normal business. And so we can take a look at that process and see if we can find opportunities for improvement.
Do you know specifically what your CSRs, whether in the general call center or in the specialized center, are telling customers when they call and say they don't want to be put on, they don't want a smart meter put on their home? What are they instructed to do?
They're instructed to talk to the customers to see what their concerns are for receiving or not receiving the meter. And those vary. You know, a lot of times it's general things that's, for example, that they may have read on the internet. So we provide back some factual information. Those calls can be lengthy, you know, as you're trying to educate. And that's a big part of this, is there's a lot of myths out there. And so the training that they have in the call center is trying to get that top percentage of those types of things that they can talk about. When it kicks over, if it gets too complicated, though, it kicks over to our resolution center and they can really work with the customer. Sometimes it's a face-to-face. We've had lots of situations where we've met with customers, and some customers, after we go through the education process, understand and they go forward with the meeting. Some want to learn more, and that's where the postponement list was derived, was customers that just didn't have the confidence yet, didn't have the information, wanted to do more research, and that's when we started deriving and installing the postponement list.
Okay, so let's back up. So customer education process doesn't work. Customers still not satisfied with the answers that they're given. At that point, does the utility say, we have a postponement list, would you like to be put on it? Does the customer have to ask to be put on a postponement list? I need to know specifically how that occurs.
I'd like to bring Shad Kuhn up, that's runs that part of our operation, and he can walk you through that.
That would be great. Thank you.
In addition, Hearing Officer Wenzel, it might be appropriate, if we can't answer your questions today, for the company to provide a specific written response to those questions. So let's see if Mr. Kuhn can address your questions. If not, we are more than willing to provide a specific written response that addresses a specific concern or question that you have.
Good morning. Good morning, Hearing Officer Wenzel. This is Shad Kuhn with NV Energy. I'm a part of the customer service department. There's a number of processes that we have when a customer requests a postponement. As Mr. Smith described, if the customer service representative able to address their concerns, usually the call is ended. If the customer still wishes to be on the postponement list, if they want to speak to somebody about it, they're transferred to our resolution center, or they're given the opportunity for our customer service representative to create an email or a phone call to that resolution center to include them on that postponement process.
Mr. Kuhn, spell your last name, please.
K-O-O-N.
Thank you.
So it's incumbent upon the customer to ask to be put on the list?
Correct.
Okay. And what are the parameters of that list? Is it indefinite? Are they told that they're it's only a temporary postponement, and at some point they will get a meter. What information are they given about the postponement list?
The current direction that's been provided to the customer service representatives is to inform the customers that it is a postponement, and at this point, it will be scheduled for a future date, but they will be contacted in advance.
Is there any public information available about that there's that a postponement list exists on the utility's website, in the letter that goes out, and any consumer outreach that's done?
When the question is asked, it is shared with customers about that possibility, but I don't believe we have that on our website, and I know that it's not included in the letter today.
And has that postponement list been, has the commission specifically approved such a list? That the utility can put customers on a postponement list by request?
The commission has not specifically approved that process. The company has completed 99.63% of scheduled deployments, and that is a approach to logistics that the company has used to manage the deployment and replacement of existing analog meters. The company does intend to replace and install analog meters for all services at this point. I'm sorry. Smart meters. The company does intend to replace analog meters with a AMI network meter at every service location at this juncture.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Have customers been told that it's, is it clear to customers that this is a postponement list only and not an opt-out?
That is something that we have made very clear when that request has been made.
Does the utility have any objection to providing that information on its website, that there is a postponement list and the parameters of such a list?
Hearing Officer Wenzel, we have no objection to that.
Okay. Or that, is there any objection to the CSRs being trained that when a customer calls to object to the smart meter, that they actually inform the customer that there is a postponement list?
We can work on that as well. The key is here, we do want to notify customers that, as Mr. Olasegi noted, that we still do intend to install all meters by the end of the project.
Understood. Okay, let's talk about your consumer outreach efforts. I'm on pages 16 and 17 of your reply comments. And let's start with number 1, 60 days prior to smart meter installation, NV Energy conducts community outreach, to explain the smart metering system. I think you alluded to that a little bit earlier, but can you elaborate on what those efforts entail and what you've done in Southern Nevada and what you're planning on doing in Northern Nevada?
Yeah, that's good question. And that 60 days is kind of a range of of a particular area that we'd like to go present the smart meters to. What it involves is we go to, whether it's a Rotary Club or a homeowners association, wherever we can get a high impact for a particular area. We bring a specialized group in again. Shad Kuhn's been one of these folks that has made several of these presentations. We go in and we make a presentation about the program, very similar to the presentation I provided you today. We answer customers' questions about the program. We try to dispel any myths that may be out in the market. We try to really identify our program versus other utilities. And it's a general question and answer session. Like I mentioned, we've done approximately 60 of these in southern Nevada. We're just getting kicked up and starting more of these in northern Nevada. We've been doing high-level presentations in both locations for quite some time, primarily to political groups or local Rotary Club type of presentations. So we're now in the midst of scheduling our kickoff for Northern Nevada. We call it an Envision event. It'll be in the first couple of weeks in January, where we'll bring in community leaders and really try to educate around the program itself. And we're starting to schedule the outreaching programs in the local community.
And do you think that's been effective to reach most of folks in the community about the installation of smart meters?
Well, it obviously doesn't reach them all. And that's, the folks that we do touch normally, understand the program at the end of the session. We've surveyed that. It seems when we are face-to-face with our customers, the understanding of the smart grid does improve. UNLV has helped us with some of that. And, so anytime we can touch customers, it's better.
Does the company have any process in place currently to notify the community of what the installation schedule is?
We started out with a map on our website that was kind of showing this particular areas that we would go into. The flaw that we found with that particular map is our meter deployment really follows our meter reading route cycles. And so we start to move around, and so it's hard to really stay consistent in one area versus another because of the blackout windows for billing. And so that's one of our lessons learned. When we wanted to do that, it found itself to be problematic. Meter deployments, as we start to move north, is these meter reader routes are all over, particularly like the Reno area. You'll jump around the community, so we've got to think that through a little bit better. We would love to put a map out there and say this particular neighborhood or this particular subdivision is going to be receiving the meter at the X time. There's just some problematic procedures to do that. That's something that we can explore a little bit further and see if we can't pinpoint. I know we have, a 30-week or a 30-day view, but it's not much more than that.
30-day view, what does
30-day
that
view
mean?
of where we're deploying next.
Is that why there's the 30-day letter?
That's correct.
That goes directly to the customer? And the reason why I'm asking is because, again, from reading the comments that were submitted, at least for some folks, they seem to not be aware that they're getting the smart meter until they either get the automatic phone call or after you've already installed the meter and they get the door hanger. So, and I'm guilty of not looking through my mail thoroughly. I take what's bills and put them over here, and everything else I put over here and get to it when I have a chance. But again, it seems like the word's not getting out, and we need to be doing a better job at notifying customers. It may not be down to the actual street level, but northwest or southeast or, geographically, areas of town. I mean, I leave that up to you and how your meter reading route is defined. I'm not asking you to change the schedule, but I think we really need, and it was actually Mr. Gold for AARP that brought that up in his comments, which I think is a really excellent idea, that we need to get that out there. So once again, it's just more information and people know, I'm next, or I'm not for another 2 months. So maybe if I have concerns, I can contact the company, I can get more information, and you can help that. It also helps that education process move along. All right. Okay, thank you. And then, so let's talk about 30 days prior, there's a letter. Explain to me about the letter. It includes a fact sheet and a phone number for the resolution center. That's the number we just talked about, the Las Vegas number, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And do we have a sample of that? Is that attached to your reply comments?
It is not attached to our reply comments, but we can provide one today.
Okay. I would like to make that a workshop exhibit. So if you can get that today and get that in Carson City and Las Vegas, I'll accept it.
We will do so.
Okay.
Another suggestion on that is the door hanger might be something of interest as well.
Yes, anything involved in this process, in this consumer community outreach process from beginning to end, I would like to see that.
We'll get you that today.
Okay, then let's move to the 5 days prior. There's a, NV Energy calls the customer using an automated system to remind them of their upcoming smart meter installation. And again, that includes the number of the resolution center. It's my understanding, again, from reading the comments, that that's really the first time for the majority of commenters that they become aware that, oh, I'm next, or it's coming. And at that point, that's when they contact the utility and try to get the ball rolling to get more information, and maybe some to get on a postponement list. Is that general? But I've also heard that at that point, if they call, and I don't mean I've heard, I've read, but at that point, if they call, they have been told it's too late by the CSRs at NV Energy. They've been told, sorry, it's too late, you're scheduled, we can't put you on a postponement list at this point. Is that accurate?
That should not be accurate, no.
So, at any time prior to that knock on the door, they can
As long as we
get on the
have cell
list?
contact with the installer, we can.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you, what?
As long as we have cell contact with that installer that's out on that route, we have constant communication.
Okay. Okay, and then let's talk about the area of meter the actual installation date. I think the thing that concerned me the most in the comments that I read, and also a lot of the input the commission has received as of late, is what information they're being told by the installers. It appears that, at least what we've heard, is some of the interaction, customers have felt like they're intimidated, that they have to put the smart meter on their home even if they don't want it. They've been told their rates are gonna go up. They've been told a number of things. And I understand that you can't control everyone out in the field, but again, you've gotta do a better job. I mean, I understand that this is an installation vendor, not NV Energy employees. That's what I read.
That is correct, it's scope services. But we have opportunities to speak to those employees on a daily basis. We hold a teleboard briefing at 7 a.m. every morning. So we have opportunities to help message. All of these employees have been talked about what to say and not to say in public.
And I don't doubt that.
But
But what happens from the time they leave NV Energy or leave their place of business and go out into the field, it's hard and you can't control. But that's another reason why it's essential that there is a direct phone line to a resolution center. So in the event that someone's in the middle of an install and they're getting misinformation and they're in a state of panic, there's a phone number they can call and verify that what they're being told is accurate, which my hope is not, but, you know, they need to have that sort of access. And then I understand that before the old meter is actually removed and the new meter is put on, I thought I read somewhere that Scope Services takes a picture of the meter reading. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
However, we do have information from one complaint that was filed that that did not occur, and I don't need to use people's names, so I won't, but the individual consumer is the one who took the picture, and it was actually NV Energy's employees, am I getting that right? That did the installation of the new meter, so what happened there?
And that was a one-off where it was a special appointment, and it was an NV Energy employee that actually made the meter exchange.
Well, explain that to me, what's a one-off special request? I'm not familiar with that process.
It was one where a special appointment was made to do the meter install itself, and it was done by one of our employees that didn't have the same equipment to take the picture.
Okay, so if a customer requests a specific day and time, that's made available to them? Or within reason, I'm sure, but...
No, this was a situation where we were working with this customer, and they were only there, they wanted to be there when that meter exchange was going to take place. So we made an appointment and actually went out and made the exchange.
Okay, and so when that happens, it's not a scope services installer that does the installation?
In this particular instance, it was an NV Energy.
Okay, and are NV Energy employees specifically trained in these special procedures that we have set up for installing smart meters?
They are trained. This particular employee did not have the capability of taking the picture of the meter, which we need to fix that. That's correct.
How many times does that occur? Is that frequent? That NV Energy employees are doing the installs as opposed to scope services?
It's not very frequent. I would say 95% of the meters or greater have been installed by scope services.
Okay. And then at the bottom of page 17, it indicates that NV Energy logs all calls, making notes in its customer information system, and each issue is then addressed by an NV Energy customer service representative. And then you have in your comments how you group, what areas you group those complaints into in your log. Has that log been provided in your reply comments?
It's not a log, it's on a particular customer account, so it's not a report that you can just copy off.
Hearing Officer Wenzel, this is Debbie. Are we close to a break?
Yes, when we're done with commission questions.
Are we close to a break? I'm not able to keep writing very much longer.
10 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Has the commission approved implementation of dynamic pricing? Mr. Ellis?
Yes, the commission conducted a separate proceeding in which it reviewed the dynamic pricing trial plan as well as the tariffs that the company would offer, or that would be options for customers who choose to participate in the dynamic pricing trial.
And that's completely voluntary, correct?
Yes, it is.
And that's to begin in 2013, I believe, 2013?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear your response.
is provided.
But again, at this point, just to clarify for, again, the benefit of the folks here, the commission has not mandated dynamic pricing and time of use rates in relation to deployment of smart meters.
That is correct.
And the commission would have to,
The commission has the power to review our pricing proposals, has to find that those proposals are just and reasonable, and make a determination that they are appropriate to implement.
page 34, you reference, there were concerns about call center delays, and you indicate that you guys, the company has taken steps to address that, increasing staffing levels. And there were some comments from customers about that very thing, that they were put on hold, and they were told, when they were contacting you about concerns with their smart meters, they were told that you were experiencing high volume calls. Does that sound accurate?
Yes, the commission took testimony on this issue, or a very similar issue, in Nevada Power's general rate case. And that was docket 1106006. The company has taken 5 steps to remediate that situation. First of all, Sierra Pacific customer service reps are now available to answer phone calls from the Nevada Power Service territory, so that provides both a base loading and a peaking capacity. In addition, the company has added peaking resources to its call centers to address high volume days. In addition, the company has added telecommunications bandwidth or capacity to allow a larger number of calls into the center. The company has also added internal personnel through job transfers, creating base capacity in the call centers. And finally, the company is endeavoring to fill open positions in the call centers in Reno.
And that issue is currently before, but the issue regarding the call centers is before the commission in the Nevada Power General Rate case. Is that what
correct,
docket you're referring to?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. That's docket 11606.
Okay. That is all the questions I have. Thank you for taking the time. I think we do have one follow-up from Mr. Davis, and then we'll take a break.
Yeah, it's just out of curiosity, what percentage of the people are on the postponement list right now?
I believe that we have completed 99.63% of scheduled installations.
Yeah, but how many are on if you have a postponement list, how many people are on that list?
0.37.
0.37. Okay, okay.
What?
Thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. With that, we are going to take a break for lunch, and we are in recess until 1 o'clock. Thank you.
$600,000. I can figure that out.
I'd like to ask those operating the video conferencing equipment to please put the mics on mute while we're on break, or to disconnect the equipment. Thank you.